Hello, I'm Sora Luxon, and this is Magic Lesson number 74, Scroll Bliss. Because that's what books used to be called, scrolls, because they were a different sort of implement. I've been asked for so many book recommends over the last few weeks that's what I'm going to do. So many questions asking specifically for title recommendations, who I read, who people think they should be reading. First, if you're a member of a formal or fraternal order already, read the books suggested during your training. There's a reason they're suggested. Whether you're a novice, a few year initiated student, or 50-year advanced high practitioner, well, the ones belonging to orders that long are usually going to be diving into material with a squeal of delight and a smile. So they don't need to be advised of this, right? They don't need someone advocating that they go read. But regardless, if you're a part of a system you like, one that works for you, which if you chose it and then are sticking with it, it should be working for you. I'm assuming and imagining it does. And if it doesn't, it's time to change things up. But if you're part of a system that works for you, do the reading that system suggests. And all the good formalized orders, all of them, they have reading. They're going to call it different things, but they have a suggested practice list, a reading list, a training, exposés that you ought to be working your way through in step with their system. So I'm not going to say you should circumvent that or that you should set aside what your system teaches to interject other material first just because you prefer it. Martinist orders, Freemason, Masonic orders, Rosicrucian orders, Hermetic orders, even self-initiatory orders like, at-home Golden Dawn systems of Western esoteric, Hermetic magics. They all lay out recommended material in a timed and planned approach to best allow for comprehension and also slow absorption, necessary timed absorption of that material, of what's being taught. And then most of those memberships, if you are an initiate, are going to come with a wellspring of secondary material sources for research, for personal preference, pleasure pursuits, things you might like to read more than other things, for further self-evolution if you have the time, or, furthered self-mastery, which you can opt into using. They'll have their own YouTube channels. They'll have their own, writers within the order. They'll have digests sometimes. They'll have whole videos, possibly, galleries of ongoing, theory lecture. Some of the Stanford lectures are that way. If you already belong to a formal system, follow your system's recommends first and foremost, and then use what they're putting at your disposal. Now, for people not in a formalized system, who might not have access to that and just don't know where to begin, or perhaps for people who are part of an order, who are experienced already maybe in their own self-initiated order, to where they've taken in everything that's on offer, watched every YouTube video, read every book from the initiates list, spent every weekend in their fraternities, private rare book section of their library or museum, to where they have them all but memorized. And now you want some publicly available exterior materials just because there's so much out there and you're looking for my suggestion because you value it. It's very difficult for me to give book recommends. And you're going to find out why right now. Because I'm going to tell you, one, you can't go wrong delving into Carl Jung. Whether you apply and agree with his material or not, it's worth a read. The thing about me suggesting Carl Jung, however, is that there's enough weighty material that you could spend years with just that one author. Whether you apply and agree with his material or not, it doesn't matter. Carl Jung is sort of the, I almost said Sartre because I'm immediately thinking of philosophy, but sort of the Karl Marx of the psychological format in occultism. And by that, I mean, there was psychology and occultism before Jung, and there is psychology and occultism after Jung. But there is no psychology and occultism without Jung, which is a phrase that usually people say about Marx. So if you need something to read and you haven't checked out Jung yet, give that a go. I've actually called him Carl Jung before because the name you're searching on Google is going to be Jung. It's actually pronounced Jung. I have a couple different languages floating around in my head. So when I get a little mentally hyperbolic, I tend to go back to, almost like a phonics dictorial sense of reading alphabets. So I'll make that mistake. I once, when I was flipping back between French and Italian with two friends, I wound up calling a kiosk a kiosk for the same reason. I do that out loud sometimes. Anyway, Carl Jung, if you haven't approached Jung yet, do that. You probably have, though. It's a big name. So most likely, most of you listening already know of him, have read some of his work, and have, perused or adapted it for your own use. So some other names. Manly P. Hall. I think I've mentioned this one before, especially the massive tome, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. I don't remember how much it is, but if you have 20 or 30 bucks to spend on a paperback, that's the one I'm going to suggest you do. If you're just looking for something else to read, it's going to flood your consciousness with massive amounts of context and history and hinted insight passed forward from time immemorial about the mysteries. All of them. So that's worth a read. Try some, Israel Regardie, a student of Crowley at one point, if you haven't already. A Garden of Pomegranates, that holds limitless potential if you veer into that lane of magic and really get into it. The Tree of Life is actually a really good one too. Gosh, there's so many. But so Israel Regardie. The Ciceros, that's a modern name, Schick and Tabitha Cicero. They have some books on the Golden Dawn system of Hermeticism specifically. They don't really stray from that too much. And I believe they're both alive now. If you're looking for something a bit more modernly comprehensible, written now within our lifetimes for you to maybe use or apply, or you just enjoy that writing style. Writings by Harvey Spencer Lewis. Every Rosicrucian's going to know that name, the Rosencreutz orders. He's, the founder of AMORC. That leans more towards the introspection method. Wonderful, wonderful publications, if you can get them by him. And honestly, consider reading things like, and here's where I'm going to go a little crazy. I might get a little overwhelmed. John Dee, Aleister Crowley, the scribe Nicholas Flamel, centuries previous, the Neoplatonist philosopher Plotinus, anything by Hermes Trismegistus, or via the Three Initiates, anything by Hermes, anything by Thoth, or ascribed to Thoth, Virgil, Zoroaster, Pythagoras. Kind of funny, chime just kind of went off in my head. Because I was watching an old Disney clip the other day that someone sent me, I think on Facebook, another occultist, that's so rife with the occult theory of, math, vibrational harmonics, symmetry, and it's like Donald Duck running around in ancient times through some of the ancient mystery schools. If I could find the link to it, I think it's a little YouTube video. I'll attach that here just for fun for you all to look at, just to show you how occultism is everywhere. When you start to be able to translate the wisdom of the magic language that's being perceived, in the spheres of philosophy, math, natural sciences, astronomy, astrology. Ptolemy for astrology is really good. If you need something to read there, go for Ptolemy. Are you beginning to hear? This is actually very difficult. This is why asking someone like me for book recommends is a difficult thing. Asking any magi for a book recommendation, just what have you read? That's going to be an endless list. What do you think I should read? I think you should do what's best for you. So all I can do is list names, and if you feel inspired to go search some of them out, you will. It's very tough because our lexicon for worthy material stretches back to Egypt. So, yes. And that's available for you to read now. Before the first assassins were branded, these books existed, these priests were writing. And you can read those writings right now, brand new for the first time, brand new to you. People like me, we wonder why people don't read those things when these powerful tools are right there to be acclimated and to such good use. The way you can apply these things for yourself, it's amazing. It's life-changing. Anyway, more names. Anything by Abramelin the Mage, Albertus Magnus. If you have time, the Prophecies of Nostradamus. Quixotic. They're confusing at times and it can come across a little bit preachy, but again, well worth a read. Isaac Newton has some really mystical stuff. And even inside the essays of Einstein, there's some very mystical, occult, little hints and cues slipped in here and there. Bacon, the Count of Saint Germain, the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes. He was a well-known occultist. I'm trying to recall his name. I know it was a he. He had some private journals at one point, I remember I read, or diaries of some kind, partial diaries. Can't remember. I think it's Doyle, Conan Doyle, something like that. Just Google Sherlock's writer and start from there. Theodore Roos. I enjoy Theodore Roos, German writer. Rasputin can be dark, and again, at moments, incredibly confusing, but also eye-opening. There was an anthropologist from Stella Falcon, maybe, from Stella Matt. Member of the Golden Dawn before Stella, I think. Levi, too. Read some Levi if you haven't already, if you get the chance. Adler. She works with NPR. She's a well-known witch. Albert Pike. Conway. Barden. Fortune. Blavatsky. There's a Blavatsky quote that's kind of in my head. I'm trying to remember it a little bit. Something about the spoken word has a potency, unsuspected and disbelieved in by modern sages. Rhythm is closely related to the four elements of the ancients, and because such or another vibration in the air is sure to awaken corresponding powers, union with which produces good or bad results, as the case may be. I think that's Blavatsky. Awakens to good or bad results. Something like that. Anyway, famous. You won't have a problem finding writings by Blavatsky. Rosenkreutz. I'm pretty sure that the Swiss artist Geiger, the Alien series, he was a member of the OTO, and I can remember reading some pretty interesting stuff from him here and there, put out by his publicist. Not much, more interspersed with interviews he gave or writings he did on his own artwork, and you can see in there occultic method and occulted theory being shared in his own way, very beautifully. Martinus, of course, if you're part of a Martinist order, you're going to know that name. Alexanders. And that's where Alexandrian Wicca respawned from much older roots and then was brought back forward to the public eye, which, by the way, happens a lot with different occulted orders. They move in cycles. They'll pull back and then they'll become public, right? They'll kind of fade from optics and then return, generally at a chosen moment, very loudly and for good reason. But you get the idea. These are all great, and you can just Google these last names. I know I'm not always including first names. I'm not always remembering them. But these names I'm rattling off, if you just put the word magic with a K or occult next to that name, you're going to find something attributed to them that you can throw yourself into mentally. And of course, don't forget the obvious, powerful magic there for you to apply in the best possible ways. That's hidden in plain sight, available for decoding the Bible, the Egyptian Book of Life, and the Book of the Dead, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Look under any rock and you will find me. The Talmud, anything reputable from a scholar of the Kabbalah. So many rabbis with just amazing writings on the Kabbalah. I can't even begin to list those names. It would take me an hour. I should really do a whole series of videos on just the Kabbalah as part of like the lessons and spells playlist I'm going to start making one of these days. So there's something to look forward to. I will. Here's a little wizard's trick in case this particular little podcast is getting boring for those of you that didn't ask for book recommends. You probably have heard of the Kabbalah. You may not yet know that when it comes to Kabbalah, there's generally 3 spellings, and each is an encoded wink and a nudge to those who know as to where that tradition or method of approach that's being written about or spoken of or taught is coming from. So Kabbalah, spelled with a Q, that's usually going to refer to Hermetic, Western alchemical, esoteric, magical Kabbalah uses, forms, and writings. That's with a Q. Kabbalah, spelled with a C, is telling you that it's about or coming from the Christian mysteries and the Christian mystic tradition, that Kabbalic foundation and interpretation for publications. Kabbalah, with a K, is the Hebrew form. So there you'd be finding the mystical tradition interpretation coming from the Torah or reinterpretations of mysticism via the Bible. So, again, real quick, Kabbalah with a C, Christian mysticism. Kabbalah with a Q, Hermetic Western wizards. Kabbalah with a K, Kabbalah, that's going to be coming from a Hebrew tradition. Just a neat little insider's tip. So, yeah, there's recommended reading, which is why you shouldn't ask me which books to buy, because this is my recommended reading. Read everything from all time and anything that appeals to you. There's your recommended reading. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, if I had my way, the Library of Alexandria is what you should be reading. We should each of us have one and then guard it with our lives for posterity's sake. And remember, you don't have to agree with, adopt, or even attempt application of what you've read. It's a perspective. And especially, you never have to use any of these things that you're reading in a dogmatic way or as a doctrine beyond challenge or adaptation, that you can't use it and play with it for its usefulness to you. If something isn't useful, cool. You read that, it gave you a perspective, and now you're going to move on to the next thing. No writing is a rule book. And the truly great writings, they can't actually be put to use if they're approached in that way. These are offerings, ancient wisdom gifts that are being offered, that the self has to resonate with for their secrets to become unveiled to their perceiver. And that's going to happen differently for you than anyone else. That's how the microcosm works. So take it easy on yourself. Lighten up when you read your magic homework, quote unquote. Allow yourself to sit, to contemplate, to enjoy what you've read or what you've heard from a great lecturer, to meditate on the ideas that call out loudest to you. Maybe just to the one word, the one noun. Your higher self isn't going to lead you astray, especially if you're taking the time to listen to those whispers that your higher self is saying. Maybe the last chapter you just read of something seemed ludicrous to you, or wrong, or just meant nothing at all. Maybe it was very boring. But there was one word, one sentence that provoked, that resonated, that said, hey, maybe if I pursue this next idea, that this sentence popped into my head, this next tangent on my path, that would be best. So do that. Head that way, in the way that feels and works best for you. Individually, personally, that's where your strongest, best insights, revelations, magical power is going to come from. And be open to things you might never have considered as being of interest in your reading, in your practices, in your perspectives. Because it's those spontaneous paths which you can then, again, adapt, work with, transfer into what you're already using. That's what's going to offer, most of the time, the greatest reward. You have to remember, it is our bias which imbalances us, right? Whether you're coming from walking between the columns or, seeking out a natural flow inside of pagan practices, harmony, balance is one of the great keys. So bias, confrontation, reaction, having locked in opinions that keep us from our better selves, that's the battle, again, quote unquote, the fight we're waging here against those imbalances to create instead a more balanced, more harmonious, productive self. So maybe there's something you never thought of looking into because you were so biased against it for whatever reason. Why not read it? You don't have to apply it. You don't have to agree with it. But why not give yourself the chance to look at it first for what it is and then decide how to use it? I have really found in my own journey that it is these spontaneous places, these blind spots I have, that we all have, that when you finally recognize them and are able to move, I don't want to say past them, but move forward with them, that suddenly reveal some, amazing, leg, shoot, tangent off the path you were already on, that just becomes maybe one of your most powerful hermetic rituals or one of your most powerful daily practices to work into daily life or to approach a certain relationship in a different way. And you can learn these things from the people you least expect. And that's why you didn't hear them or notice them before, and they've always been there. So consider that. Consider the spontaneous idea that prompts you to read the person you never would have thought maybe you should read. That's my recommendation. Until next time.